Okay, so you want to own a university. Big campus. Football stadium with your name on it. Thousands of students paying tuition every semester, rain or shine, whether they learn anything or not. Sounds like the most stable business ever invented. The University of Phoenix was once worth $11 billion. In 2010, it had 470,000 students and pulled in nearly $5 billion in annual revenue. John Sperling, the founder, was one of the richest men in America. The business model looked bulletproof, and in many ways, it was. The problem is that the University of Phoenix of today is not the University of Phoenix of 2010. Enrollment has dropped 83%. Revenue collapsed from $5 billion to well under $1 billion. And the entire for-profit college industry, a $35 billion empire at its peak, has been exposed as one of the most controversial and financially devastating business models in American history. The gold rush that made billionaires out of entrepreneurs and created thousands of accredited degree-granting institutions in less than 2 decades is now a cautionary tale shared in business schools and congressional hearings alike. The question is not whether the model worked, it is whether it should have ever been allowed to exist in the first place. And at the center of it all is a question that cuts to the heart of the American dream. What happens when the business of education stops being about teaching and starts being about collecting? By the end of this video, you will understand exactly how the for-profit college machine worked, why the federal government was its silent business partner, where all that tuition money actually went, and why nearly every major chain either shut down, filed for bankruptcy, or paid hundreds of millions in settlements. You will meet the students who got trapped, the executives who got rich, and the one question nobody asked until the whole house of cards collapsed. Most importantly, you will see why owning a university is not what it looks like from the outside, and why the most dangerous business model in America was the one that promised to change lives but delivered only debt. Before a single dollar of tuition flows in, you need 2 things: accreditation and state authorization. Accreditation is the golden ticket. Without it, your students cannot access federal financial aid, and federal financial aid is the entire business model. The accreditation process takes 18 to 36 months and costs anywhere from $500,000 to $5 million just in legal and administrative fees before you enroll your first student. State authorization is another layer of approvals, background checks, and compliance filings that vary wildly from state to state. Some states require surety bonds, others demand years of operational history. But here is where the story gets interesting. There are 2 types of accreditation in the United States. Regional accreditation is the gold standard. It is what Harvard, Stanford, and your local state university carry. National accreditation is a different category entirely, designed specifically for trade schools and for-profit institutions. Most for-profit colleges did not pursue regional accreditation because they could not meet the standards. Instead, they pursued national accreditation from agencies that were essentially invented for the industry. Agencies that approved everything, inspected nothing, and collected their fees on time every single year. The result was a system where a brand new for-profit college could be taking federal money within 2 years and enrolling students who believed they were getting a real education from a real institution. The students did not know that their credits would not transfer to any other university. They did not know that their degree was not recognized by most legitimate employers. And they definitely did not know that the accreditor approving their program had never once visited a single classroom. Here is the engine that powered the entire for-profit college industry. The United States federal government guarantees student loans. A student walks into a for-profit college, signs up for a program that costs $30,000 per year, and the government sends that money directly to the school. The student gets a degree, the school gets cash. The government is stuck holding the debt. At the peak of the industry, 90% of for-profit college revenue came directly from federal student aid programs. That means the American taxpayer was the real investor in every single for-profit college in the country. And here is the part that makes this model unique. Unlike a car wash or a restaurant where the customer pays with their own money, the for-profit college customer pays with borrowed money they will likely never be able to repay. Default rates at for-profit colleges were 3 times higher than at public universities. Within 5 years, nearly 1 in 4 for-profit students had defaulted on their loans. But by that point, the college had already collected its tuition. The risk was entirely on the student and the taxpayer, while the profit was entirely private. For comparison, a community college costs roughly $5,400 per year. A public university costs about $11,000. A for-profit college, $30,000 to $40,000 per year, nearly 4 times the price of a public education, and 8 times the cost of community college. And the quality of instruction was not remotely comparable. For-profit colleges spent more on marketing and recruitment than on instruction. University of Phoenix spent nearly $1 billion per year on marketing at its peak, more than its entire annual spending on faculty salaries and curriculum development combined. Recruiters were paid based on how many students they enrolled, not how many graduated. And the target demographic was very specific: single mothers, military veterans, low-income workers who dreamed of a better life but had no way to pay for a traditional 4-year degree. Recruiters were trained to find the most vulnerable people in America and sell them a dream. The sales pitch was always the same: flexible scheduling, online classes, financial aid is available, career placement rate of 90% or higher. And then the fine print. The fine print that said the program was not transferable to any other university. The fine print that said the job placement rate included graduates who found work at a fast food restaurant. The fine print that said the degree was nationally accredited, not regionally accredited, which is a distinction that matters because most legitimate universities and employers do not recognize national accreditation at all. Students were enrolling in programs where the degree was essentially worthless outside the building where they earned it. And the recruiters knew it. Internal documents later revealed by government investigations showed that recruiters were explicitly told to hide the accreditation difference from prospective students. They were trained to say, quote, "Our credits are accepted everywhere," end quote, when the reality was exactly the opposite. The highest performing recruiters were the ones who lied the most convincingly, and they were rewarded with bonuses, trips, and promotions for doing so. University of Phoenix was the pioneer and the king. Founded in 1976 by John Sperling, a former economics professor who believed working adults needed a flexible path to a degree, it grew into a juggernaut. 470,000 students at its peak, $5 billion in annual revenue, a stadium naming rights deal worth $154 million. University of Phoenix Stadium, home of the Arizona Cardinals and host of the Super Bowl. It was the most visible for-profit university in the world, and it made its founder and investors extraordinarily wealthy. Apollo Group, the parent company, had a market capitalization of $11 billion in 2010. John Sperling died in 2014, with a net worth estimated at over $2 billion, proof that for-profit education could make you richer than most technology startups. And then everything changed. Government investigations revealed that University of Phoenix recruiters were misleading students about costs, graduation rates, and job prospects. The Federal Trade Commission opened an investigation. The Department of Education tightened the rules on federal loan eligibility. Enrollment began to slide, slowly at first, then catastrophically. By 2017, enrollment had fallen to 90,000 students, an 80% decline. Apollo Group was sold to Apollo Global Management, a private equity firm, for just over $1 billion. $11 billion to $1 billion in 7 years. The stadium name came down in 2018, replaced by State Farm. The University of Phoenix still exists today, a shell of its former self, with annual revenue roughly equal to what it spent on marketing alone at its peak. While University of Phoenix was shrinking, others simply vanished. ITT Technical Institute operated 130 campuses across the United States with 43,000 enrolled students. In September 2016, the Department of Education barred ITT from enrolling new students who used federal financial aid. Within days, ITT closed every single campus. 43,000 students woke up one morning to find their college had permanently locked its doors. Not a single warning. Not a single plan for transfer. Just a note on the door and a phone number for loan forgiveness that would take years to process. 8,000 employees lost their jobs overnight. Students who had taken out private loans to attend ITT were still on the hook for repayment because private loans are not eligible for federal forgiveness programs. ITT Educational Services filed for bankruptcy, and former students are still fighting for compensation more than a decade later. Corinthian Colleges had a similar fate. 100 campuses, 70,000 students, and a business model built entirely on misleading job placement statistics. When the government finally cut off federal funding, Corinthian collapsed into bankruptcy. Its campuses were sold for pennies on the dollar. Students were left with degrees that employers did not respect and loans they could not escape. The Department of Education eventually approved over $1 billion in loan forgiveness for Corinthian students, the largest such action in history at the time, affecting more than 100,000 borrowers. But the forgiveness only covered federal loans. Students who took out private loans through Corinthian-sponsored programs were still required to pay back every single dollar they borrowed for a degree that no employer would recognize. Not every for-profit college died. DeVry University still operates, though enrollment has fallen by more than half. Strayer University and Capella University merged into a single company called Strategic Education, which now operates mostly online. Grand Canyon University transitioned to nonprofit status in 2018 after years of regulatory pressure, and a handful of smaller for-profit colleges continue to operate in the margins, mostly online, targeting the same demographic with the same sales pitch. But the industry has permanently shrunk. Enrollment in for-profit colleges has declined by more than 50% since 2010. The Gainful Employment Rule, which ties federal funding to student outcomes, took full effect in March 2025, making it nearly impossible for new for-profit colleges to access federal loans unless they can prove their graduates actually get jobs that pay enough to repay their debt. The demographic cliff, fewer 18-year-olds graduating high school every year through 2030, means the competition for students will only get fiercer. The remaining for-profit colleges have shifted their model away from flashy campuses and football stadium naming rights. Instead, they operate entirely online with minimal overhead, targeting working adults who need a credential to check a box for their employer. The marketing is quieter, the promises are more cautious, and the federal government is watching closer than ever before. The era of the for-profit college empire is over. What remains is a shadow of what it once was, smaller, more regulated, and far less profitable. Here is the paradox of the for-profit college. The business model was so good that it destroyed itself. 90% of revenue from guaranteed federal loans, zero risk of student default because the risk belonged to the borrower. Recruiting the most vulnerable people in America with promises of a future that the school knew was unlikely. It was the closest thing to a legal money printer ever invented. But the machine ran too hot. The default rates got too high. The stories of veterans and single mothers drowning in debt got too loud. And the government, which was the silent business partner funding the entire operation, finally had to step in and shut it down. The for-profit college industry looked like the most stable business in America. A guarantee that you would get paid whether your students succeeded or failed. But the guarantee was the problem. When you remove risk from the equation, you remove accountability. And when you remove accountability from education, the students are the ones who pay the price. Not with their tuition, but with their futures. The for-profit college was never in the education business. It was in the lending business. And when the government stopped lending, the entire industry collapsed. The same mechanism that made it so profitable is the same mechanism that destroyed it, because the borrower was never the customer. The taxpayer was, and the taxpayer finally stopped paying. The visible product was a degree. The invisible product was debt. A $35 billion industry sold hope in exchange for signatures on a loan document, and the for-profit college was the only business in America that got paid before the customer ever knew what they had bought. That is the real economics of owning a for-profit college. A business that looked like education, operated like a bank, and ended like a casino that finally got raided.